Somebody asked me a question a while ago that I haven't been able to forget, which was, what was the last thing you changed your mind about? A really deceptively hard but wonderful question, right? And after spinning my wheels on it for a while, I think I finally got an answer that's worth sharing. And that is, I've changed my mind about performing live. For years, I genuinely thought that if I was going to call myself a true musician, if I was going to take myself seriously as an artist, then I had to perform. I had to play gigs. I had to get on a stage. And earlier this year, I finally admitted something to myself that I've probably been avoiding for a long time, if I'm honest. And that is, I just simply don't enjoy performing live anymore. The juice just simply isn't worth the squeeze. You know? And this is a realization I have wrestled with for a good few years. And it was difficult to admit because I thought it made me less of an artist or something, if that makes sense. I also remember vividly, there's been a few occasions in the past couple of years where I would watch other musicians I was performing with on the bill, and I would see them up on stage having such a blast. And it left me feeling really guilty about how I was feeling. And I want to make this very transparent and very clear, guys. I still love making music and making cool shit. In fact, I just finished a new song this morning, right here, in this very room. And I'm actually making new music right now in the studio. I literally just got back from the studio last week, and I have a new song that's being mixed as we speak. And it's going to go off to mastering soon. And I'll be doing an exclusive showcase and listening session for the new song on this channel at the end of the month. And then after that, it's going to go out everywhere on streaming platforms in September. So I'm very excited for that. And I'm very excited to be giving you guys an intimate, exclusive window into that. But anyways, getting back to my point here. I just don't feel I need to perform the music so much in order to share it with the world and to feel that I'm worthy of what I'm doing. So what happened? You could ask. Well, maybe if I take us back to where it all started briefly, it will provide a clearer window into where I'm at now with it. So I want to transport us back to when I was a 15-year-old kid at school. And I was just starting my GCSEs, so I would have been in I think it was about year 10. So yeah, I just turned 15. And I'm in music class, and I met these 3 other kids in my music class that they looked exactly like me. They talked exactly like me. We all listened to the exact same music. We thought the same, and we quickly started jamming together after class. And I remember, I don't know what it was. I think it was like a school a music school project, but we were all asked in our class by our teacher to collaborate and get together with other kids in our class and try and make some music. And that's how that all kind of began. That was my journey into being in a band and stuff like that. And we started jamming after this music class, and very quickly all the kids in our class, they started to form a crowd, and all eyes were on us. And it was obvious pretty quickly between just the four of us in this band that there was a chemistry there, and that something happened when we would play. So we started this first band, and after a couple of rehearsals, we noticed that the school was advertising a Battle of the Bands competition. So we entered it and went in for it, and we ended up winning the Battle of the Bands at school. And we got a very good response there from the rest of the kids in our year at school and stuff like that. And it was just a very magical, exciting time. And I remember the rush and the trip I would get after coming off stage, and the feeling of kind of connection and just acceptance from my peers and people I went to school with. And it's probably worth just quickly mentioning that when I was at school, I considered myself a very shy, introverted kid in class. Like I found it very hard to kind of pay attention in class and learn the things that were being taught to us, and to sit down and do a test. I'd always tank tests, and I would always fail them. And I think what that came down to is inside, I was just not a confident kid. I found it very hard to sit down and learn new things. I was absolutely terrified of failure, basically. And I was terrified of failing in front of people around me in my class. And the interesting dichotomy about that is all my friends at school and all the kids at school, they would always tell me, "Oh, Jamie, you're so fearless. You just don't care. You just do whatever you want. You don't turn up to classes all the time if you don't want to. You'll go and play music with your band. You get on stage and do all these things." And that was interesting to me because that's not how I felt on the inside. I didn't feel fearless on the inside. But I guess when you're a kid, your desire to want to do something surpasses the fear of doing something, if that makes sense. That's the best way I could describe it. But anyways, the band quickly started gaining some traction. And our parents were seeing what was going on with us, and they thought there was something really magical happening. And they would send us out to local pubs and bars around our area and get us to play gigs and stuff like that. And we ended up landing pretty quickly a local weekly residency spot at our local pub. And we got paid for doing this. It wasn't much, but back then, and we're talking like 15 years ago or so, we got paid like £100 as a band to play every week at this local pub. And it would be packed out on a Thursday night, which when I think now, that would be almost unheard of. You wouldn't find your local pub on a Thursday night packed out. And that just goes to show how times have changed. But then we quickly, from there, we started playing Battle of the Bands in our city. We started playing bigger 200 capacity venues, and they were packing out as well. And we ended up winning the Battle of the Bands in our main music venue in our city. And we won some money for that. and we ended up gaining some more attention and people. We actually got some fans. And eventually, towards the end of that experience at school, we were lucky enough to play our school prom. And we got paid for that as well. Which, when I think back now, it's insane because all of those things that were happening at such a young age, it really did feel like my whole world had just opened up for me. Almost overnight. And when that stuff was happening, and also finding these other three guys where we have all these common interests and we're very similar in the way we are and how we see things, it really did feel like the sky was the limit. And that, okay, cool, if all these things are happening already and popping off, who knows where we'll be as a band in like 2 years. So, and I very much felt, when you're in a band at that age, everything's new and exciting. You're discovering new music for the first time. You're having your first experiences with a girl for the first time, your first crush. All your feelings are heightened and everything feels a lot more exciting and magical and new. But most importantly, there's an intensity to that experience, Like those first experiences, there's an intensity to how you feel. At least that's how I felt. And as soon as I joined my first band and I found these other guys who I very, very much felt part of a tribe and part of this kind of underground community, is the best way I can describe it. Basically, whenever I was in class, I just did not care about anything else. All of my energy and attention was aimed at this singular goal of being in a band and taking off when we left school. So that's kind of how and why that's why I fell in love with performing. And that's where it all kind of started for me. And then that band kind of dissipated and we all kind of went off after we left school, and we started kind of playing in other bands, and we started finding and discovering other interests. At least that was what was happening with other members of the band. So that band ended up ending about a year after we left school. And when I went to university, a similar thing kind of happened there. I found three other guys who I shared very similar interests with in terms of music influences and things that we like doing outside of music and studying. And we had played, I remember vividly, we played a few very, very successful gigs in our town where we were studying at music school for our degree. And a few of the gigs were really sold out. Like, they were packed out. We played one of our popular music venues in the town a few times called the Boiler Room. And everyone from university and everyone from my music class, all my peers and all my friends, they all rocked up to a couple of these gigs. And I remember the gigs went really well. We performed really well, and everyone in the band, it kind of brought us closer together. And I remember coming off stage at one of the gigs, and the friends that were there to see us and the rest of my peers, they were all saying really positive things about the gig and how well they thought it went and how much they liked it and how impressed they were. And that kind of feeling of acceptance from people around you and people recognizing you for what you do. It's like that kind of spotlight is just projected on you and nobody else. And it is very intoxicating and it's very attractive. But I remember specifically, there was an A&R scout that worked at our music university, and she was in the audience. And she came up to me afterwards and she said, "Jamie, there's some work to be done here, but keep going with it. Like, I can see something in it. There's a spark there, so don't give up." And that really stuck with me for a while. And I remember a band coming on after us. And I remember standing in the audience. And I just had this feeling. It was almost like a karmic wash had just descended over me. And I'm looking up at the band playing. And all the noise around me has just kind of disappeared. And everything just kind of feels silent. And I remember thinking to myself, I feel so whole and at one with everything right now that it doesn't matter what happens from here on in my life. I feel completely happy with what we've just done. You know, everybody likes it. I've been recognized for what is important to me and what I enjoy doing. So it doesn't matter what happens from here. I feel complete. And that is such a trip. I can't describe what a trip that feeling is. And anyone that plays live or anyone that makes music or creates anything, you would know the feeling I'm referring to. And this feeling kind of over time, that kind of fire inside me slowly started to burn out, because the band I was in at the time, none of them were really doing anything behind the scenes to make the live gigs and the band happen. Like, they weren't moving the train forward, so to speak. So anyways, behind the scenes, I'm rehearsing, like I'm organizing all of the gigs. I'm organizing all of the rehearsals. And at the time, I was also working this part-time job to earn a bit of money, a bit of chump change, should we say, while I was studying at music school. And I worked at the retail outlet House of Fraser for a while. And all the money I was making from that job, I was reinvesting back into the band so that we could go into the studio with a producer we were friends with at music school and work on new music. Like, I was reinvesting all my money from that part-time job and putting it back into recording studio time so that we could record new music and put it out and promote it whilst we're at music school. And none of the other band members were doing this. So eventually, over time, something that felt like a dream to pursue ended up feeling more like an obligation and a job. And that was the first time I really did start to notice how much hard work was involved. And when it comes down to it, when you're in a band, you really are only as strong as your weakest member. And that was something that was very much going on here in my university band. So basically, that ended up slowly disintegrating as time went on. And after those gigs we played that went really well, we ended up taking it a step further and we went into London, and we had played a couple of gigs there that basically were a complete catastrophe. Like, we played the Underworld in Camden, And at this time, we didn't really know London very well. It was all new to us. So it was all very exciting. And we thought, oh, if we go to London, then we're going to get picked up. We're going to get signed by a label. We're going to get noticed by an A&R scout or somebody. And we couldn't have been more wrong. We had rocked up to this gig at the Camden Underworld. And we were all excited. We turned up with our gear, we loaded it in, we did our sound check, and when the doors finally opened at like 8 p.m, literally no one was there. I think the only person we ended up playing to was the promoter and the bartender. That was literally it. I mean, it was so underwhelming. You couldn't have scripted it. And then we went on to play another venue in Camden called the Purple Turtle. And I don't think that's there anymore. But we had turned up to play this gig. And again, because we didn't know anyone in London, we were literally just hoping that we could ride off the back of the other bands that were playing with us on the bill. We were hoping that they were going to bring people so that we could play to them. And we could kind of showcase ourselves to a new audience. And basically, none of the other bands brought anyone. So we actually ended up having to pay. It cost us money. We had to pay the promoter to sell him back the tickets, the gig tickets, because we couldn't sell them to anybody and we didn't bring anyone. So the gig ended up costing us money, time, and like 2 hours getting there and loading in all of our stuff. And this happened a few times in that band. And again, behind the scenes, I'm doing all the work to make this thing happen. So the whole thing just became a drag. Is all I can say about that, really. And I remember halfway through our set that night at the Camden Turtle, our band's drummer, his drum kit just completely fell apart halfway through our set. And it just completely broke down. And we kind of had to stop the set, but we kept going. And our drummer, bless him, he did the best he could to kind of keep moving forward. He had like his hi-hats and his snare held up by his hand, and he was just playing along. And the whole thing was just a disaster. And that was kind of really where that band ended. And after that, I kind of moved into London after I graduated at music school. I got my degree and I decided I kind of had enough of the town we were in. And I needed to kind of open my world up a bit more and kind of spread my wings and expand my horizons. So I moved into London and I found myself this kind of really down and out, run down attic room. It was like a shoebox attic room in southwest London. And I lived there for a couple of years and I just kind of went on a string of dead end jobs just to pay my rent. And I started going out and playing gigs by myself as a solo artist. And I must say, for a while, going out there alone and just performing live by myself, it gave me a lot of freedom. It was very freeing. You know, just to go to an open mic night on a Tuesday night in Brixton, just rock up with my guitar, get on stage and play some new songs to people. There was a lot of freedom to that. And it taught me a lot about myself as an artist and a musician and what I'm capable of achieving without the help of anybody else. And there was a realization during that time that I could see certain areas where I could definitely be a better songwriter and a better performer. But I remember thinking there was a point where I realized, oh, I actually don't need anybody else. Like, I'm actually good enough to do this by myself. Like, there's enough of a spark here that I could ignite a fire if I keep working at this. And that carried on for a while. But the problem was just there was never any money involved. You never got paid for these gigs. And the kind of stress and the nerves that would come with getting up on stage and performing in front of an audience. It felt exhausting at times. And through this, there was a moment where I thought, okay, well, I'm not really enjoying playing too much by myself anymore. Maybe I just need to join a band. Like, I'm in London now. Let's maybe join a band and see if I can reignite that spark for playing live. So I started auditioning. I started auditioning for bands, and I auditioned as a guitarist. I auditioned as a guitarist for a couple of bands around London that I saw online were advertising for a new member. And I didn't get any of those auditions. And then I saw this one hardcore electronic indie band called Little Death Machine. And they had a single out at the time. I can't remember what it was called, but they had a single out. And the production, I remember finding the production to be really interesting. And something like I hadn't really heard before. It wasn't really my type of music, but there was something in there that really caught my attention. And the music video for the music was really good. So I auditioned as a drummer for this band. And I ended up landing that job. And I was almost like a session drummer. I was a session drummer for this band. And I played with them for a good year. And we went out and played some really big shows. They had a manager at the time, and the front man of the band, the singer guitar player, he was really proactive with getting us gigs and writing all the songs. So I didn't have to do any of the writing. I didn't have to manage any of the rehearsals. I didn't have to help get gigs. I could literally sit behind a drum kit and just hit things. And it kind of transported me back to when I was a kid, where I was just playing for the sake of playing and having fun. And I really enjoyed that. There was like a freedom to that, where I could just play. And we ended up playing a gig. We supported a band that were huge at the time from the US. And we ended up selling out the garage in Islington. And it was packed out, and we got paid for it. And there was an open bar waiting for us after the show. And we ended up even going on tour to the Midlands and to the North. We supported a Manchester-based band called the Red Light Effect. And we did like a 5-day tour, and we went to Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, and we played a show back in London. And these were all really like packed out busy gigs to like 100 capacity clubs. And again, these experiences were really fun. It felt really good to be part of something again. You know, being in the band, we're a 3-piece band, but it felt like I was part of a tribe. and something that was almost bigger than myself. And that was fun for a while. And I remember one of the nights specifically on the tour, we played this really cool venue, this rock venue in Liverpool. And afterwards, one of the bands we were playing with, they knew a guy that was a manager of a bar that was close to where we were playing. So all of the bands and everybody, we all walked to this bar after the gig around midnight, and we had a lock-in at this bar. And at some point during the night, one of the guitar players from the other band, there was a piano, there was an in-house piano in this bar. And he just climbs up on top of this piano, takes his shirt off and starts dancing and drunkenly singing. And everybody in the lock-in in the bar just kind of erupted with laughter. And this is the thing, guys, like, although it's not exactly a money spinner being in a band, you do have so many epic experiences and stories that come with just gigging and just like meeting all these different people and having all of these really fun, incredible experiences. So I wouldn't change it for the world. And that's an important observation to make. I wouldn't change any of these experiences. But after that, I ended up, after a while, because I wasn't really into the music as such, I ended up just leaving that band. And for a while, I started recording my own music again in the studio, and I kind of did the odd gig here and there after that experience, but I wasn't really being very proactive with it. And then I had this opportunity through a couple of my really close friends growing up. One of them was a singer and this big kind of entrepreneur working in the tech world. He was living in the US and then he moved over to the UK. I got some random call from him one day, just after not hearing from him for like 3 years. And he said, "Jamie, it's so and so. Oh, by the way, I'm moving back to the UK for a new job. And I'm moving to London. So whereabouts do you live and where should I move?" And I said, "Well, why don't you come and move near me? Because I need some new friends." So he went, "Okay, I'll look into it." A week later, he rocks up literally around the corner from where I'm living. And we start hanging out and jamming. And he says, "Oh, I want to start a recording studio." And we started talking about that. And I went, "Well, where would the premises be? What would it look like? Is this just for like personal pleasure? Or are you looking to kind of like turn this into a proper business?" And he said, "Oh, I want to turn this into a business." So long story short, we ended up finding this house to rent in Southeast London. And we ended up building a studio in it and launching this startup recording studio. And it's safe to say that was basically a disaster. After like a year and a half, we tore the whole thing down and we just closed the business down and we all went our separate ways. So that was that. And then again, I'm back to being a solo artist for a while, just doing my own thing and working day jobs at the same time. And this is the other thing, guys, when you're trying to pay rent and live life and pay for food and cover your bills, going out after a 9-hour day at work to some local bar and psyching yourself up to play a gig in front of nobody and not getting paid, it starts to kind of take you down. you know? It starts to get the better of you. So, anyways, this is all kind of happening as I'm working a job during the day. And then the pandemic happened. And we all know what happened there. We were all thrown into lockdown. There was no live music. Nobody was feeling very inspired. At least I wasn't. And you had stupid governments at the time saying stuff like, oh, if you're a creative person or you work in the arts, it's time to forget that for a while. And maybe it's time to get a real job. You know, you had idiots like that. When, keep in mind at the same time, when everybody is locked in their houses with nothing to do and nowhere to go, what were they doing? They were streaming Netflix. They were listening to music. They were reading a book. They were picking up an instrument. They were engaging with multiple forms of entertainment and art in order to keep themselves sane. So you can imagine for creative people, especially being in a major city like London, hearing governments come up with stupid things like that was frustrating and uninspiring, to say the least. But anyways, that was going on. And as the pandemic and the lockdown ended about 18 months later, I did have this wonderful opportunity through one of my best friends to open his wedding reception. He wanted me to perform a half an hour to 45-minute set opening his wedding, which you would think, of course, was a huge honor and massive privilege, which it was. But I think not performing for 18 months and being locked down in a house and being out of practice, I did feel very rusty as a performer. And to have that kind of pressure and expectation right out of the gate, coming out of lockdown, it felt like a lot. But that's not to say I let it get the better of me, because I rehearsed very heavily leading up to that wedding gig for a good few months, I remember. I was trying to be very strategic about the wedding set to make sure that it was kind of connecting with the audience and people would recognize the things that I was playing. I also wanted to make it personal to the groom, because there's a lot of kind of throwbacks, obviously, and there was a lot of history from our childhood in terms of the things we grew up listening to. So I was trying to blend some of that in as well. But anyways, I remember the day of the gig, I get to the wedding reception to prepare to go on stage, and I can see around me the whole bar and reception is starting to fill up with not only all the wedding guests, but friends of mine. My immediate family are there as well, and my girlfriend at the time. They were all there at the wedding. So you can imagine the pressure felt quite heavy. And I remember going backstage to get myself psyched up for the gig. And I remember having a moment where I can hear everybody outside all talking and waiting for me to come up and waiting for me to come up and perform. And I remember just being so nervous. Like, my nervous system was completely through the floor. And I'm standing there, and it's just a couple of moments before I'm supposed to go on stage. And I'm saying to myself, Jamie, is this a good idea? You know, you haven't performed in a while. We've all been in lockdown. You're a bit rusty. Do you really need to put yourself through this? Like, is it too soon? But anyways, I pull myself together, I get up on stage, and I play the gig. And surprisingly, it went really well. Especially the first few songs, I feel like I delivered them really well. I kind of took that fake it to make it approach, you know, in order to kind of push myself through and just deliver and execute. So I did the gig and it went really well. And when I come off stage, although the gig wasn't perfect, it did have its flaws. Like, I made a few mistakes in a couple of the songs midway through. But for the most part, it went really well. And I come off stage, and my family and my girlfriend, they were really complimentary about the performance. And I remember having a moment where I just thought, okay, you know what? Maybe I can do this. Maybe I should keep going with this. And that did inspire me for a while. So out I went after the lockdown, and for a good few years now, leading to recently, I went out and played a lot of low-key underground gigs by myself. Some of them were paid, some of them were not paid. In fact, some of them cost me money. It is the truth of it. And I've been fortunate enough, not too long after lockdown, I have been offered this monthly residency spot back in my local town. It was a monthly residency spot that was quite well paid for doing, if I'm honest, not very much. I'd have to get on stage for an hour and just perform a few covers, and then I'd throw in some of my own songs as well. And I did that for about 10 months, and I got paid to do it, but the energy in that room, it just wasn't right. No one was really listening to my performance. Nobody seemed to be really connecting with it. My performance didn't seem to be really landing with anybody. And again, that just became a real drag. And just bringing us up to more recently, last year I went out and played a few gigs, just open mic nights, and I played one paid gig somewhere in Brixton, and they were just not good. I found myself not wanting to rehearse for the gig or prepare for the gig. Like, anytime I do vocal scales or warm-ups to practice for the gigs, it was such a drag. And I found myself kicking and screaming every time I would go to rehearse for the gigs. And I'm not sure why I'm surprised, but inevitably, when I would get up on stage in those final few performances last year, the performances were really bad. No one was listening. I ended up tanking a couple of the gigs really badly, simply just because I wasn't prepared enough, you know? And the final straw was, I played this gig in Shoreditch, and I went up on stage, and I was supposed to be up there only 20 minutes, and literally by the third song in, I was just making mistakes, I was getting frustrated, and then I had this kind of spotlight effect syndrome, where I really did feel that all eyes were on me, and everybody was being really over analytical about everything I was doing, and everybody was picking everything and pulling everything apart, which I'm sure was not the case, because if I'm being totally transparent, nobody was really listening. And that was another thing that was frustrating me. Like, no one was really listening. And I didn't get paid for that. And the nerves that you feel before going on stage, it really just, as I said at the beginning of this video, it just felt like the juice was just not worth the squeeze anymore. That really is the best way I can put it. Like the fire to do these performances and play gigs had officially burnt out. The fire had officially burnt out to the point where halfway through this last performance, I just simply stood up. I put my guitar on the stage, and I walked off without finishing the set. And I headed to the back of the room where the bar was, and I propped myself up at the bar, and I just started ordering shots of vodka, one after the other, sinking it back as fast as I could, and getting totally blasted by myself. Just completely reveling in the disaster of the experience. And I had a moment where I was sitting there feeling sorry for myself, and I just thought, why am I doing this? Like, no one's got a gun to my head forcing me to do this. So why am I doing it? It's not what I love about being an artist anymore. I've kept going out there to do it. I've kept doing this. I've kept trying to throw myself another lifeline, and I've tried to reignite that fire over and over. And it's not happening. So just accept it. And after that gig, that really was the last time. That's the last time I've played. I haven't performed since, and I feel better for it. And I was listening to a podcast one day while out on my morning walk in the sun. And it was a podcast featuring the writer, Mark Manson. And he was retelling this story about how when he was a kid, he had this childhood dream. He had this childhood dream of wanting to become a famous guitar player. That's all he would think about. He wanted to be like these heroes that he would look up to. And he had this realization that every time he would go and sit down to practice playing guitar, there was always a resistance. And there was always a fight to sit down and practice. And he came to the realization that maybe he just liked the idea of being this famous, well-known guitar player. But he wasn't actually prepared to put in the hard work to get there. And that's when the penny dropped for me in relation to my relationship with playing live now. I just got to the point where it felt like I liked the idea of it, but I was no longer willing to put in the hard work to make it as good as it could be. And that's where it's led me to now. And this is part of the inspiration and the influence behind launching this YouTube channel. Because in some ways, this channel has taken the place of what I used to get from getting up on stage and performing live. This has kind of taken its place now. And I much prefer sitting here today, hitting record and shooting a video in front of all of you guys, just sharing my experiences and my thoughts about things. And it's about just accepting that we're all changing all the time. And the way we view things and the way we feel about things, that changes constantly as well. And we shouldn't fight that. We should embrace it and lean into it. And those later experiences of tanking those gigs, it was telling me something. The universe was trying to tell me that, Jamie, you just don't want to do this anymore. And that's fine. And it's worth just quickly mentioning that the reason I made that dating video is because it shares the same philosophy and problem, I think, which is performing a version of yourself for someone else, when all I really want to practice is trying to stay authentic and myself. In a world that is constantly trying to test, it's trying to test that. You know? Like, we're in a world and a society that is constantly trying to pull you in all these different directions. And I guess for me, it's about authenticity, which, as a creative person, I think authenticity is all we really have as an individual if we are going to become anything, I think. Because let's face it, my story today has already illustrated that there's enough talented people out there in the world. Like, you go to an open mic in London on a Tuesday night and you will find incredibly talented people that are just as good as you, or if not better, at what you do. And they're also willing to work harder as well. There's enough talented people in the world, so you're never going to be able to outcompete or outmaneuver that. Does that make sense? And you shouldn't want to. But what you should want to do is you want to make sure that you are able to be yourself and find ways to express that and share your unique viewing lens of the world around you. I've talked about this before, because that's all you really have as an artist. Like, the only thing that's going to set you apart, and the only thing that's going to make people pay attention to you, is if you're able to be yourself and express that. Because there's enough talent. And I think a lot of that for me is about authenticity and just sharing how you see things. And that's it, really. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I just want to be myself and stay true to where I'm at right now. And Oscar Wilde, he has this awesome quote where he says, "Be yourself, everybody else is taken." And that's probably the best way I can summarize how I'm feeling and the nature of today's message. The spirit of today's message is basically that: be yourself because everybody else is taken. And the question it's led me to, following, if we circle quickly back to the question I was asked by somebody recently, which was, what was the last thing you changed your mind about? After thinking about it and after reflecting on my experiences and my relationship to live music and performing live, the question that evolved into was, what if I'm performing the version of an artist I think I'm supposed to be? And it got to the point where I just thought, when do I stop forcing myself to be the person I thought I was supposed to become and actually just start being who I am? And that's where we've ended up now. And that's what getting my new music out represents. And that's what this YouTube channel represents. And the book that I'll be putting out next year. And I just want to cap this off by saying, I'm not saying I'll never perform again. I'm not saying I'll never get on a stage. I just know it's not where I'm at right now. It doesn't excite me at this moment in my life. And I've made my peace with that. Perhaps accepting it has actually made me feel like more of an artist. Anyways, thank you for listening today, guys. I know this was a bit of a long one, but I appreciate you coming on this journey with me. Those are my thoughts today. Thank you for watching.